Everything old is new again. America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, bark like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
In a past life, he was himself. He gave his father the talk. He is the most interesting man in the world.
Welcome to Everything Old is New again. This is Douglas Viviani with the ever-inquisitive David Cohen.
Yes.
Why did I play that most interesting man in the world clip? Isn't that interesting?
Yes, because I think we have a guest on with us that could qualify for the most interesting man in the world.
Yes, they did. If you notice, they changed from that older gentleman to the younger character, and I
didn't like that.
I think they made a mistake. I think what they should have done was ask this gentleman, because he is, in my world, the most interesting man in the world. I've seen him at Star Trek convention in Vegas on stage. The audience was just
speechless. You are
as I was. Yes, it was a tremendous presentation. He's been in 50 movies, countless television shows, including RoboCop, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, Star Trek Into Darkness, which we know is one of my favorites, 24, Fringe, Sons of Anarchy, among many others. It was interesting because at the height of his acting career in 2014, he took a turn and obtained, believe it or not, a PhD in Italian Renaissance art history from UCLA. Directed so many TV shows. He's directed Monk, Hawaii Five-0, Sons of Anarchy, Sleepy Hollow, and now can be seen appearing in front of and behind the camera for TNT's The Last Ship. Who am I talking about?
I forget already.
Peter Weller. Welcome, Peter. Thank you for coming on board.
Welcome, Peter.
Yeah. That's a great intro.
Welcome to Everything Old is New again. Last week we left off asking Peter Weller, at the height of his acting career, why he took time off to study and obtain a PhD in Renaissance art history. To get a master's in Roman Renaissance art when at a time in your career that I would suggest is at the high point, let's say, what was it, around 214, you got it. What inspires someone to, I'm not going to say change career, but to add on this extra burden, this extra adventure to your life beyond acting and directing to do this, which is not an easy thing to do?
No, it's not an easy thing to do. It had a momentum of its own. Like I was saying when I was younger, and it started off. Ali McGraw, who was going for a master's degree at Wellesley in art design, and became like people forget that she was a stylist in New York with some very famous photographers, Sokolsky and other people, before she ever became an actress or a model. But she's like when I was going out with her in the late '70s. I mean, I was the caboose at the end of her train because every night was a party with artists, art historians, the dozens and the mockers of the Metropolitan of MoMA, of museums, every single night was with these people. So she took me by the hand through the largest Picasso exhibition ever when the Guernica, Picasso's monolith, was going back to Spain in '79, and it's all 5 floors turned into Picasso. I get to go through it privately with her because of her clout, and I got turned on to art. Now, my mother was always trying to turn me on to visual art, but, Ali was the first person to say, look at this, look at this, look at this. Picasso's a realist, he's an impressionist, post-impressionist, he's a cubist. So you could study all that on your own, but when you study backwards and you get to the Renaissance, and I just did it because I loved Italy, and I said, okay, I got to look into Renaissance. When you get to the Renaissance, though, Renaissance is now not only about art, but it's about a whole transformation of politics, of society, of tax counting, of poetry, and it's not just painting anymore. So you got to have some help with it. And I qualified for a summer program with Syracuse as the largest programs abroad in the world. I mean, they have campuses all over the world. They do a lot for the idea of engineering compassion in the world by sending kids abroad. So I went to their campus in Florence. I took a couple summer classes. I qualified for a very special program to do an MFA in Florence, totally, where they pick 6 geniuses out of the gene pool of universities in the world to do the entire master's degree there, in front of the art, in front of the Ninja Turtles. Not in a classroom.
Right.
You have to go on field trips and see all this stuff. So I qualified for it, but I wasn't going to do that. Man, you kidding me? I'm an actor. I'm a made guy. What am I going to go back to school for? All of a sudden, there's a 3-union strike in my world in 2001. I know I got to do a TV series for Showtime. Syracuse says this is the last year we can offer this to you. I go, what the heck? I'll go see it. I was going to quit in 6 weeks, guys. I mean, look, man, the return to academia on a graduate level where you have to take undergrad classes because you've had no undergrad training in it, and you have to teach field trips, and you have to stand with no notes in front of Michelangelo, Donatello, Leonardo, Raphael, and and you have to teach, hey, what do I need that for, man? I'm in the movie business. What I got a backpack at the school for? And listen to people with no social skills, And so, but I did it thanks to my mother and my wife. I was going to quit. My mother said, "What are you going to quit? You never quit anything in your life. What else are you going to do?" My mother was very loud and brash, and she was great. I miss her madly. So I did that. Okay. Cut to, it turns out you can only use upper level recommendations for 3 years. So I had to apply for a PhD thing. I couldn't put it on the back burner. I got accepted at NYU and UCLA and started UCLA. But all that is just sort of on its own. The guy that turned me on to looking at art, Renaissance art, was a very, very famous, and he still works, a director of photography who probably is the guy who changed all of color photography, named Vittorio Storaro. And Storaro did Apocalypse Now, he did The Last Emperor, did The Sheltering Sky, did Dick Tracy. Last Tango in Paris, first got to filter 3 or 4 sources of color light. And he's the guy that said to me, I was in Japan at a film festival, I said, "What's your favorite painting?" He says, "Peter, have you been really to see the origins of Renaissance in Padua? Have you seen the anamorphic narrative frames of Giotto?" I said, "I don't even know who the hell Giotto is, and I don't know what you're talking about." He says, "Well, we can't talk about art then." And I tracked that dude down. He's wearing Versace scarves. I want to strangle him. I said, "Vittorio, what do you mean we can't talk?" He says, "Peter, you could say that Rembrandt, you like him. I could say Picasso, but you have no context for visual art that takes you all the way up to the movies. It starts in everything you see on a wall in Europe, from the medieval through the Renaissance, through the French school, through the Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Expressionism, Cubism, whatever, is movie making. And if you don't go see Giotto in Padua, you don't know where it began." And he walked away, and I went to see Giotto in Padua, and I said, "Oh, man." I just saw Giotto in Padua 2 weeks ago. You guys could Google that. The Arena Chapel. Just put Arena Chapel Giotto, Giotto. And look at that thing.
Well, believe it or not, I hate to say this, I had the same interest you did. I did not have the ability you did, but I took a number of online courses on, Renaissance art and so forth. And,
oh, you did?
Yes, and I was.
You know who Giotto is?
Yes, but I would suggest. I just want to get to just for the audience, just an idea that the interesting part. If the regular guy that's just listening right now may not say, "What are you talking about?" The idea is you watch and look at some of this Renaissance art or any art, but for that day, that was the movie of the day. So they put enough in there to stare at this project, to stare at this picture, and if you had the skills to do it, you could sit there for an hour and it would tell you a story, if that makes sense, right?
Correct. So who am I talking to, Doug or David?
This is Douglas, yes.
So Douglas, just for Joe Blow out there like me, who kind of says I know what I like, when they look at a painting and I don't like that, there's a very famous guy named Ernst Gombrich, who was also a great children's author, who said the best thing to know about visual art is you don't know what you like. You like what you know. And if someone with some knowledge takes you by the hand and explains the flat black canvas of Mondrian, right, or the action painting of Jackson Pollock, it tells you where it came from, you will end up liking it. It may not be your favorite, but you will end up liking it because you know it.
Right.
And the thing is, I didn't know what the Renaissance had given. And when you're absolutely right, what the Renaissance gave the world was a movie. Before the Renaissance, you had to look at a painting or up in caustic, something on wood, and you had to sort of invest the story yourself. Wait a minute, is that Moses? Is that manna from the sky? Is he splitting the rocks with the rock and the serpent? Is that before, is he dying before the walls of Jericho? Where is he there? You have to be told that, right? The Renaissance then starts to tell the story of the thing.
We'll continue with this fascinating discussion with Dr. Peter Weller to talk more about art, its relation to today's world. We'll even talk about life lessons and Star Trek. Come on back.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. We continue our second week with Peter Weller.
Before the Renaissance, you had to look at a painting or up in caustic, something on wood, and you had to sort of invest the story yourself. wait a minute, is that Moses? Is that manna from the sky? I mean, is he splitting the rocks with the rock and the serpent? I mean, is that before, is he dying before the walls of Jericho? Where is he there? You have to be told that, right? The Renaissance then starts to tell the story of the thing in panels. Hey, this is Moses leaving Egypt. Hey, this is Moses when he's like trapped, when he's at the Golden Calf. This is Moses on the Sinai. So now you're starting to get the narrative. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so if everybody's out there listening about what the Renaissance really gave us, yes, they gave us single-point perspective, which is absolute perfect, relationship of everybody who's seen a painting. Yes, they gave us color. Yes, they gave us the Ninja Turtles and passion and movement and all this stuff. But most of all, what they gave us was narrative, was a story, was a movie. And yeah, when you walk in and you see something like in the Sassetti Chapel in Florence, you see the Medici posing as the disciples of St. Francis. You go, wait a minute, is that legit? To put the Medici, like contemporary guys, in the painting? Yeah. You know why? Because they want everybody and their uncle to come in here with their kids and be entertained by it, like a manger scene.
Right.
And you go, hey, look, there's Uncle Larry. And they're entertained by the movie. It's an entertainment. The Renaissance really starts off with truly the idea of painting, whether it's religious or not, as an entertainment.
Right.
As something to make you go, wow, let's follow the story here.
And speaking of entertainment, the PhD that you got then in some ways may or may not have, but at least later on you used this skill in your hosting of Engineering an Empire, 12 episodes and 2 separate documentaries on Rome and Egypt. And real quick, I just wanted to compliment you on that. I know History Channel has gone away from that, but I really enjoy that, and maybe it's something for people to take a look at, because you learn quite a bit from a person, as you're hearing, that's down to earth, that's going to make this something that's of interest to you and very easy to put your mind around, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm happy that schools call me all the time. They use it all the time. I mean, those 12 episodes on the beginnings of modern engineering, and the graphics are great, and I had a ball. It was right after I got married, and it was I had done my MFA, and I was about to start my PhD, but that was really just entertaining as heck for me, because it was as much of an eye-opener for me as it was to do it. I mean, to figure out the quincunx of forts invented by Napoleon. Just astounding stuff, man.
Great stuff.
Engineering in Carthage, the first sewage systems and running water. Stuff I didn't even know, man.
Yeah, you did, and you did a great job with it. Again, this is Douglas Viviani with David Cohen, and we are having a great time with Peter Weller himself. You know him from so many things: 24, Fringe, Sons of Anarchy, Star Trek Into Darkness, RoboCop. We can go on and on. And we'll stop listing at this point so we have some time to talk. I did want to take a moment to just investigate with Dr. Weller the idea that of our show, which is Everything Old is New Again. I think you had been saying that your participation in this show, or your thought to do so, you had some thought as to what our topic is and how it had some relevance. Maybe you can explain on the air here what you think of the show, or at least the concept of our show. Well,
the attraction to do this show was, initially, I know you guys wanted to talk about RoboCop, and I'd be happy to talk about RoboCop. But the context of realizing your past and your history, and not just sort of honoring it like doing a Fred Astaire memorial, but to contextualize the past subsequently, so that we don't make the same mistakes, or that we have a guidepost. All the things I've been talking about. Doesn't matter whether it's myths or whether it's history. Those things fascinate me, because my PhD is in Renaissance Italian art history and how to look at paintings, and the way, for instance, just for what I teach kids, is like the way you're going to look at this painting here is exactly the way they looked at it back then, and the way you look at a movie now. It's a movie. It was a movie to them. They go, golly, look, it's the story of Mary. Hey, yeah, that's Joe coming to the temple. Oh, yeah, and over here, that's the introduction to that's when the shepherd comes. So all that stuff that we talk about, what's entertaining in movies, is the same thing that entertained people in the past about art. And so everything is old is new again. Is history, man. It's the second I saw it, I said, this has got to be a history show.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and it's even though it's pop culture history, pop culture back in the day. Guess what? The Renaissance art was the pop culture of the day. So let's not.
You got to see that. Yeah, but, Gibbon, even Gibbon said in the history of the Roman Empire, the history is just to be the great events. Then a thing called historiography, which every PhD student has to take, is how history develops. So it's the history of history. It's after just not the great events, it's how farms looked at it. Okay, now it's how politics looked at it. Now maybe it's how the Sahara trade in the Mediterranean looked at it. Okay, how does computers look at it? So historiography, when you take one of those classes, you see wow, you know what? Everything in its day is pop culture.
Exactly. And whatever is observed by the masses and participated in is pop culture. And along those lines, you mentioned Joseph Campbell. We've talked about him in the past. Just to catch up, the idea I thought that was the takeaway. If you have nothing else to take away from this gentleman, and there's a lot to take away. If we talk about that inner voice, if you follow your bliss, is what he used to say. I would suggest that's what maybe have brought you to where you are today. Could you just briefly, expand upon that, if that makes any sense to you?
Well, first, I just have to tell you honestly, and I don't mind breaking my anonymity. Campbell is a big influence on me as part of pop culture. He's the first guy I'm listening to that is saying that, I'm traveling a lot. My parents took me everywhere. That's saying, look at the legends, myths, stories, parables of every place you go, because they are there to lead you. And, as a friend of mine, Eric Dane said yesterday, he said a beautiful thing. He said, I really was never, even as a kid, looking for success or, money. Chasing the gold pot. I was looking for some sort of dignified sense of myself, what would lead me into, being able to live with myself. He said that to me yesterday in his Winnebago, man. It's absolutely almost made me weep. And so that's what I was looking for. But I got to tell you honestly, with my story, before I could listen to Joseph Campbell, before I could realize that everything old is new again, I had to, just for my own thing, and it's for anybody out there listening, is that I had to get sober. Because I was a chipper I never went down the tubes of wrecking a car, killing somebody, losing a job, whatever. But I was a chipper with booze and drugs in a day when it was popular in the 70s. And I had to cut that out and replace it with some sort of look for a higher world or a better world or a more enlightened inner world. And once I could turn that on, then I got back into the stuff that my mother and father always wanted to interest me in, which was travel and history and people and journeys and so forth and finding yourself. But I couldn't do that till I took all the crap out of my life. And, there's still crap in everybody's life. You're not going to, there's disappointment and high jive in everybody's life. But there's certain things that can really block and shut down the individual's accessibility to the good, the beautiful, the legend, the light at the end of the tunnel. Ulysses' song of the sirens, the promised land. It doesn't matter. Akhenaten's son, whatever the hell your place in the sun is. There's certain things I had to move. So I had to move that first. And now I'm on a great journey, man. It's not always pleasant, but look, at 64 years old, you're in your 50s, you got a kid. I'm in my 60s, I got a kid. There's nothing better than a daddy hug. But, the daddy hug is the all end all. But Campbell was the guy who really, and people say, Campbell? Really? Didn't you read Plato? No. I didn't have the presence of mind to read Plato.
No, you read The Hero of a Thousand Faces, right, instead?
Yeah, right. I couldn't read Hegel. I couldn't read Heidegger. I didn't know Immanuel Kant. I didn't know these guys. I didn't even know Chomsky, except as a revolutionary. But if you read some of his philosophy about what people are doing and where people go, he's a brilliant dude.
We have to interrupt at this point. We will return right after this break to discuss more philosophy as well as, you got it, Star Trek with Peter Weller. Come on back. Everything old is new again.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything old is new again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
We're back with Peter Weller. We left off talking about philosophical influences, and Peter, we have something in common. Joseph Campbell.
It was Campbell, really, that just said, look, there's something inside of you that's like beautiful, and even though there may be confusion and horror going on around you, you've got to follow the voice that's beautiful, man.
Right, because listen, we have children and we have things to do and mortgages to pay and all of that, and you can get embroiled in your day-to-day activities every single day and not listen to the voice at least, goodness sakes, at least for an hour or whatever, and figure out what you want to do. Let me just give you a little piece. I started the show with David 2.5 years ago, and the point was I was an attorney, still am, but I heard this bliss forever, ignored it until the opportunity came about, and when the opportunity came, I jumped on it because I said to myself, you know what, this is what I think that I'm here for. At least it's something that makes me happy. I got to dive into this and at least tell my children I gave this a shot as best I could and followed my bliss. If that makes any sense to you, that's what we did, or I did over here.
I hear you, man, and it's not a big... I mean, now, look at that compared to what the heck Abraham did to leave success. I mean, like the guy, like in those days, nobody went. Douglas, nobody went anywhere. I mean, it's for Abraham to go, listen, I'm hearing this voice, and it says go. They say, but you're a made guy. You got everything. It's not like you're starving him, man. He says, I know, but the bliss says go. And, man, nobody went. It was you were born into a life-death cycle, and if you were a slave, you'd born and die a slave. If you're a king, you're born and die a king. You didn't leave.
Right.
You didn't go follow your bliss, man. But that's a beautiful thing that you did. And listen, no one really gave me big support like, hey, you got great talent as an actor. Yeah, go to New York, go to acting school, and you will make it. Nobody ever said that. My father just said, and he didn't have any relationship to it at all, he just said, look, man, if that's what you really want to do, give me a timeline. I'll throw you some money, but give me a timeline on what your goal is and go do it. I said, okay, it's 2 years and I need $200 a month. And he said, okay, it's a deal. We shook. But at least he had trust in youth trying to find their own bliss.
Right. And that's what we interviewed Terrence Winter from Sopranos and Boardwalk Empire and Vinyl. He created these shows and he wrote them and so forth and won Emmys for writing. And he told the same story in that he says, listen, if you got 3 or 4 people that support you, not everyone's going to. Who's going to tell you can be on the radio? Who's going to tell you can write? Who's going to tell you could write for television? Who's going to tell you could direct the Last Ship? Who's going to tell you can be in RoboCop, etc.? Everyone will usually say that's not the norm, it's not the usual, you can't do it, I can't see you doing it, there's no path to get there, so good luck, but I don't think it's the way to go. But you had your dad there, and if you've got some little bit of support and you're open to listening to that bliss, then I think it's a path to happiness. If that's what you're saying, I think that's what I found.
Yeah, it is, man. And you gotta, like Justin Robart said, and you also gotta outlive the bastards. Right. And also, like what Uta Hagen, my mentor, said to me, he says, the most important thing in anything is tenacity. It's tenacity. You can learn anything. If somebody says you can't do it. And the other thing is that, one of the great, I think it's 5 rules of prosperity. I think they come from Hinduism, like early Hinduism. I mean, like the forerunners of Hinduism, like 5,000 years ago in stone. So it sounds like New Age or pop psychology. But, the first law of prosperity in Hinduism is this: find out what you really want to do and do that. And it doesn't say jack all about money.
Right. It sounds so simple, but in our world, we get wrapped up sometimes, and it gets lost in paying the mortgage. Let's just put it that way to make it down to
it. It does, and it gets lost sometimes in success. And, the thing is that another great lesson, as a 27 years old, I did the play Streamers with Mike Nichols, and Mike became, later on, Mike went on to become like a mentor, like a father figure to me, one of the great guys ever. And here he is doing this very small play in the Mitzi Newhouse Theater after so many movie hits and so many play hits and Neil Simon, and on and on and on. And he's doing a play in a house that only seats 280 people. And amazing play. And, when I first met him and started to work with him, I said, what is it that brought you back to like a small play, with 4 guys in a theater? And he says, at a certain point of success, you will lose yourself. Everyone does. You will lose yourself in the politics of it, and you always have to go back to the thing that inspired you. So right now, he was very forthcoming. It wasn't even being elliptical about it. He just said, right now in my life, I have to regenerate what turned me on about the theater. So I'm doing this small, intimate play because it's really the power behind it is the enjoyment of it, and not the frills,
Right.
And I went, oh wow. He said, remember that. So I did, and
look where you are. He ended up on Everything Old is New Again. What can I tell you?
I know. Yeah.
Which is our bliss, following our bliss. We are having a great time. I have to wrap it up, but I do want to. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, especially for myself and the audience that expects me to ask you about Star Trek Into Darkness. This Admiral Marcus that you played presents a morally questionable thing, right? To use Kirk and Khan as pawns to do, I think he thinks, a greater good for his society. And that seems to be something that could be what happens more often than not. Did you look into that? It seems like you may have looked into the motivation of this part before you took it, and or am I on base in any way, shape, or form with regard to this character and why you took it and what this character meant?
Yeah, look, I very simple. The story I told you about White Tulip, when JJ comes out in the parking lot, I tell him about White Tulip, right? I tell him the White Tulip thing. I go home, 1 hour and a half later, I get a call from my agent. It says, Bad Robot has called you up and made you an offer. And I go, great. Is it Alcatraz, person of interest? They said, no, to be one of the 9 stars of Star Trek Into Darkness. I go, those are all kids. He goes, no, I don't know, man. Whatever script is coming. Brian Burke, JJ's partner, made the offer himself. We don't know what the money is at the time. I said, call him up and tell him yes. They said, Peter, we don't know the time. We don't know when. We don't know the money. I said, listen, I just had an epiphany in a parking lot. I can't tell you what it is, but it includes my wife, my life, crying, White Tulips, J.J. Abrams. So just say yes. They go, okay. And then J.J. gets on the phone the next day and explains the whole movie to me. David, Douglas, nobody gets on a phone and tells you the whole movie in 45 minutes. It doesn't matter if you're Clooney or Marlon Brando. They don't get on the phone. And JJ's on the phone telling me the whole movie, and he tells me about the moral dilemma of this guy. That the guy made a screw-up years ago by awakening Khan, right, as a force, as a tool, but that this force got away from him. And so subsequently he has to do anything to make that right, including sacrificing the thing. So there you're in a moral dilemma, so you just can't say he's an antagonist. So JJ's explained this, and I said, man, that is like a problem. Like, how do you justify the A-bomb, right? I mean, is that good or bad? I mean, to bring Khan, look, you got the heroic end of it. Essentially, the Enterprise brings Khan under wraps. But in Marcus's idea is that once Khan is let loose, and once they believe what Khan says, then I got to do them all in. And I don't know. I can't. Yeah, is that bad? Yeah, it's bad. Is it good? Yes, it's good. Is there guys who would do that? Yes. Would General Curtis LeMay do the firebombing in Tokyo and sit there if you see Fog of War, which is the most important movie, I think, in the last 30, 40 years we ever made, 11 Lessons in Warfare with Robert McNamara by Earl Morris. If you see him saying that, pull the trigger on, we'll lose 2,500,000 people in Miami, but we have to stop the Russians now. Pull the trigger on Moscow. That rationale is insane in retrospect, but at the point that it goes on, it's legit.
Right.
Kennedy was thinking it. Kennedy was considering it, man.
Right.
So, it looks like morally reprehensible 50, 60 years later, but you got to remember that a great president was sitting in a room thinking about that.
We'll go out with the theme from The Last Ship starring Peter Weller. Check out Season 4 on Monday, June 19th on TNT at 9 o'clock. The Last Ship, and this is Everything Old is New Again.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
This is Terrence Winter, writer and executive producer of The Sopranos, creator and executive producer of Boardwalk Empire and The New Vinyl on HBO. And you're listening to my friends Douglas Viviani and David Cohen on Everything Old is New Again.
Isn't that nice to be friends with Terrence Winter?
It is. It's one of the perks of being celebrities like you and I are.
And you know what? We may have him back. But while we'll just kind of put that in the foreground at this point.
As a teaser.
We're with Dr. Peter Weller. And before we let you go, Doctor, we just want to talk a little bit about RoboCop and what you think of that movie and what it says to us today, some 30 years later after its release.
I do want to say one last thing. I want to address this before we go out. While I was promoting Star Trek Into Darkness, and I was invited to the NFL's celebrity golf game in Dallas by Emmitt Smith, and then all of a sudden at the last second called up by the head of Paramount and JJ to go open Star Trek Into Darkness instead in Austin, Texas for Harry K. Knowles. They got a perfect print of RoboCop, which I'd not seen in 15 years, to play back-to-back, and I got to see a perfect print of that thing. And then there was a 25th anniversary of it somewhat. And I have to say that everything old is new again. I looked at RoboCop for the first time during Star Trek Into Darkness coming out in a great print, removing myself from the movie and just looking at the genius of the writing and the directing and the other performances of it, and seeing what a non-ephemeral movie that is, that if I needed to have a slice of what the early age of information would be like, or the obsession with pop culture, or the immediacy of internet news, or the madness of children's games, or the trickle-down economics, or a privatization of crime, all the way up to the police force, I'm looking at this movie and thinking, man, this movie is like unbelievably prescient. It's unbelievable, the themes that those guys addressed, writing it in 1981, 82, prepping it in 1983, 84, 85, and shooting in 86. I'm astounded. I was really astounded. I haven't seen the movie since, but I saw a new print during Star Trek Into Darkness and thought, my God, if it wasn't for the fact that these two genius writers and Verhoeven, I don't know if that movie would have been that.
Yeah, and it's not just, if you haven't seen it, it's not just a guy in a suit shooting up and being a police officer and all this. I mean, that's what you're saying. There's a lot behind that. There's a lot behind you, Peter Weller. We've had a tremendous time. We've got a discussion here that'll last the ages, if you will. And I'm so happy to have had you. I wonder, maybe we'll have you back. I would love to have you back. We'll put you on the spot at this point if you're welcome to. Anytime you like.
David. David Cohen, Douglas Viviani, you guys are my new heroes, so I'll come back whenever you want.
Absolutely. Listen, spread the word in Hollywood like that pandemic from the last ship, would you please? And
I will do it, man. I will do it.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'll see you at the next Star Trek convention, maybe too, as well. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks,
appreciate
Peter.
it.
You betcha. God bless, guys.
Thanks,
bye-bye.
Don't go anywhere. We're right here. Well, and everything old is new again. There we go. But that was the end of the interview that, of course, we had taped previously. And I think it went pretty well. We're now the heroes of Peter Weller. And
he said my name first. Did you know that? He said, David Cohen, you're my hero. Oh, yeah, Doug, you are, too. I think that was a direct quote.
It's a quote, close to the quote. And I don't know.
That was really cool. He's so much fun to listen to, so interesting, just his life experiences and his take on things, too.
Yeah, I think it would be great to, we did kind of on the air put him on the spot. Would you come back? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I've had enough. Thank you. This is a little bit more than I bargained for.
Right, but you really only, behind the scenes, you only really have access to him personally right there on the air, and or maybe if you say, hey, hold on, after we go off the air, we'll talk a few seconds, which we really didn't do in this case. We spoke to him a little bit in between the sections of what we taped.
Right.
But we didn't talk at the end. So I don't know, I threw it out there, but we got a pretty enthusiastic response. I'm not sure we would always get that response. Somebody that's kind of faking it would be like, yeah, whatever, yeah.
Yeah, but the question is, does he come back? Right? I mean, that's the proof in the pudding.
And if he does, what do we talk about? I'm not saying there's nothing. There's a lot.
There's a lot.
We could talk.
Well, first of all, we have to, bow. If he comes back again, we have to just thank him like a million times for doing that. And then let him have the floor, whatever he wants to talk about.
Exactly.
Jazz, what he said he's into jazz.
Well, I was thinking of doing a show about jazz, and I know your son is in a jazz band, and he's I don't know if you go into too much detail about it, but he's applying for
he's an aspiring musician. Yes,
yes,
right.
And so jazz to me back in the day, and my day was late 70s, early 80s, was just kind of still there. But there were jazz clubs on Long Island and certainly in the city, and you heard jazz musicians and music around. Maybe not so much on the radio, but it was still kind of there. But it wasn't like back in the day, like Benny Goodman and Dizzy Gillespie.
No, it wasn't. It's not part of pop culture. Hasn't been for a long time.
Right. So the question is, shouldn't it be? And if not, why isn't it? Does that make any sense?
No, it does, yes.
And where do we go with it from here to bring it back to the mainstream?
Maybe he can help us with that.
And the reason I mention that because he's in a sextet. You be careful with that word, but
that's 6 people in a band. Just for those of you who are wondering.
Exactly. And sometimes he plays with Jeff Goldblum, who plays the piano jazz. So
from Jurassic Park and The Fly and
Independence Day.
Independence Day, right?
So we can kind of maybe do a show on if he's. We would jump the gun here, but maybe do the show with Peter Weller about jazz. I know he loves jazz. He was friendly with Miles Davis, if you're familiar with him from the 80s and 70s.
I've heard of him. Yeah.
And he could have. I would suggest if he is interested in something like jazz, like art, like directing, he's got a history of it. He's gone through it. He knows quite a bit, I would guess, about jazz and the basics.
I would think so. I mean, we can only dream about this happening, right?
Right. So we won't go too much about it, but I think it'd be interesting to talk about that with someone that's learned in that field.
Learned.
You like that?
Very learned of you.
Also, we could talk about. We cut him off a little bit about the art, and I know that's very hard on the radio, but there are some little things about art and how it relates to directing. I think that we can kind of dive into a little bit and see if he agrees or not about the idea that a director now, to me, is sort of like an artist back in the Renaissance. There's a story that's been written for them that they know the story, whether it's the Bible or The Last Ship. But how does that story get interpreted on the screen or on the picture itself?
That's deep, man.
Painting.
That's really deep. I think he'd be into that.
He would be. We have to remember to talk about that. Because I'll get him going on, you get him going too, on like the deep discussion and the almost like the relevance of who Everything Old is New Again to him, and then just let him go. And I think if he feels that he has a forum, and we've got a number of stations, of course, across the nation here, and we're on the podcast on everythingoldisnewagain.biz if you want to hear old shows, I think he's got a little forum to kind of express himself.
You think he has political aspirations?
That's a very good question. I would say no. I would say absolutely not. He is political. I've heard him talk about things on both sides of the aisle. He's one of these fellows that has opinions on, he's left and right, depending
liberal
on the
about
issue.
some things, conservative on others.
Right, and I think that's a thinker. He's a fellow that's taking issue by issue and not saying, I'm a blue or I'm a red, and just going that way. He's actually making an informed decision about things, which I think we need to do this day. Not to get political, but the idea is, as far as that's concerned, I think he is that way. But he's got a 5-year-old, and he's a little older, so I'm not sure that he really would have the time.
Hey, age, look at who ran for president this year, the combined ages. I mean, you don't have to be a young person anymore.
Absolutely. Right? That's a good point. I wasn't saying that. I was just saying, I think, because he said in interviews in the past that his life now, he's kind of dedicating a little more to his son and time for his son.
But if he knows that his running mate would be Douglas Viviani, it might change his mind.
See, now I see where you're going with this.
This could be an interesting ticket.
You may want to mention that to him next time we're on the air.
Weller Viviani, 2020.
That would be nice. All right, we'll be back on Everything Old is New Again.
Would you still do the show as vice president?
Are you kidding me? Absolutely. I'd Twitter up a storm. Oh, boy, that's loud. We're back on Everything Old is New Again next week. Come on back.